You need to move, now. This seat isn't for people like you." Captain Jake Morrison's voice cut through the luxury cabin like a blade, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the woman in 1A with absolute certainty. She sat quietly, designer hoodie pulled up, reading a book, looking nothing like the clientele he was paid to serve. He thought he was protecting Paradise Airways' reputation. He thought he was just doing his job. What he didn't know was that the passenger he was about to humiliate had bought the entire airline 48 hours ago, and in exactly 12 minutes, his 25-year career would be over. The Boeing 787 sat gleaming on the tarmac at Maui's Kahului Airport, its white fuselage reflecting the brilliant Hawaiian sun. Paradise Airways Flight 447 to Los Angeles was scheduled to depart in 20 minutes. Carrying its usual mix of wealthy tourists, business executives, and celebrities returning to the mainland after another perfect Pacific getaway. Dr. Zara Mitchell adjusted her gray hoodie and settled deeper into the buttery leather of seat 1A. To anyone watching, she looked like just another traveler, casual clothes, no jewelry, reading a paperback book. They couldn't see the $2,000 cashmere blend of her simple hoodie, or recognize that the book in her hands was a first edition worth more than most people's cars. More importantly, they couldn't see the acquisition documents in her phone that made her the sole owner of every bolt, rivet, and thread on this aircraft. 48 hours earlier, Zara had been sitting in her corner office on the 47th floor of the Quantum Tech Tower in San Francisco, reviewing quarterly reports when her assistant had buzzed in. "Dr. Mitchell, there's a call from Harrison and Associates. They say Paradise Airways is ready to accept your offer." The $1.2 billion acquisition had been months in the making. What started as personal frustration had evolved into a business opportunity too good to ignore. Paradise Airways was bleeding money, their reputation tarnished by a series of customer service scandals and discrimination complaints that had somehow never made it past their legal department's damage control. Zara had experienced their service standards firsthand 6 months earlier. A gate agent had questioned her first-class ticket. A flight attendant had asked if she was sure she belonged in the premium cabin. And a pilot had made a comment about certain passengers that still made her jaw clench with remembered fury. Instead of writing an angry letter or posting on social media, Dr. Zara Mitchell had done something else entirely. She had decided to buy the whole damn airline. The irony wasn't lost on her. 10 years ago, she'd been coding in her Stanford dorm room, living on ramen noodles and determination. Today, she was worth $8.3 billion, with Quantum Tech's artificial intelligence systems powering everything from autonomous vehicles to military defense networks. The shy computer science student who had been told she didn't look like tech leadership material now employed 12,000 people across 4 continents. But today, she was traveling incognito for one simple reason. She wanted to see how Paradise Airways treated passengers when they thought no one important was watching. "Ma'am, can I get you anything before we take off?" Zara looked up to see Maria Santos, a young flight attendant with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Her name tag read, Maria. 6 years of service, and she held her service tray with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford to make mistakes. "Just some sparkling water, thank you, Maria," Zara said softly. "And please, call me Zara." Maria's smile relaxed slightly. "Of course, Miss Zara. We should be boarding the rest of our passengers shortly." As Maria moved toward the galley, Zara noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way she glanced toward the cockpit door with something that looked like worry. In her years of building quantum tech, Zara had learned to read body language like code, and Maria's posture was screaming that trouble was coming. She didn't have to wait long to find out what kind. "Maria!" a sharp voice echoed from the cockpit. "Get back here. We need to discuss the passenger manifest." Captain Jake Morrison emerged from the flight deck, his uniform pressed to crisp perfection, the gold stripes on his shoulders catching the cabin lights. At 52, Morrison was Paradise Airways' senior captain, with 25 years of flying experience and a reputation for running a tight ship. He was also, according to the employee complaints Zara had reviewed during the acquisition, known for his old-school approach to customer service. Morrison's eyes swept the cabin with the practiced gaze of someone inventorying valuable merchandise. They paused on the empty seats in business class, lingered on the champagne service setup, and then landed on Zara. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The polite captain's smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked like confusion mixed with distaste. "Maria," Morrison called again, his voice sharper now. "A word." Zara kept her eyes on her book, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, but her ears were tuned to every whisper coming from the galley area. "Who authorized the passenger in 1A?" Morrison's voice was low but carried clearly in the enclosed space. "Sir, she's on the manifest. Dr. Zara Mitchell. Paid full first-class fare this morning." "Mitchell?" Morrison's tone suggested he was scrolling through some mental database. "I don't recognize the name." "Corporate client?" "I don't think so." "Captain, individual booking?" There was a pause. Zara could almost hear Morrison's wheels turning, calculating passenger value versus appearance, measuring profit margins against prejudice. "The Whitman party is joining us today," Morrison said finally. "Bradley Whitman from Whitman Capital. He's one of our platinum members, flies with us twice a month. I want to make sure he has the best possible experience." "Of course, sir. But all the first-class seats are assigned." "All the first-class seats that should be assigned are assigned," Morrison corrected. "Sometimes there are irregularities in the booking system. Passengers who don't quite fit our usual profile. It's our job to ensure the comfort of all our guests, which sometimes means making adjustments." Zara's grip tightened on her book. She'd heard this song before. The careful corporate speak that danced around the edges of discrimination without ever quite crossing the line into overt racism. It was the language of plausible deniability, of lawyers and HR departments and executives who had learned to hate quietly. "Sir, I don't think I understand. Maria, how long have you been with Paradise Airways?" "6 years, Captain. And you like your job? Your benefits? The health insurance that covers your daughter's asthma medication?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Zara felt her pulse quicken, not with fear but with a familiar anger, the cold, calculating fury that had driven her to work 80-hour weeks, to outthink every competitor, to build an empire that no one could tear down. "Yes, sir," Maria whispered. "I understand." "Good. I'm sure you'll figure out the best way to handle the seating situation. The flight is quite full today, and we want to ensure everyone is comfortable." Morrison's footsteps moved away from the galley, and Zara sensed him approaching her row. She didn't look up from her book, but she could feel his presence like a storm front moving across the cabin pressure. Through the large passenger windows, she could see ground crews loading luggage, fuel trucks disconnecting their lines, and the controlled chaos of departure preparation. In a few minutes, this aircraft would taxi toward the runway, and she would face a choice that would define both her legacy and the future of every employee and passenger who flew with Paradise Airways. She had built quantum tech on a simple principle. Technology should serve human dignity, not diminish it. Every algorithm her company developed, every AI program they deployed, was designed to amplify human potential rather than reduce people to data points. Now she was about to find out whether Paradise Airways could learn the same lesson. Morrison stopped beside her seat. Zara could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp, and sensed the weight of his authority pressing down like cabin pressure. "Excuse me, miss." Zara finished the sentence she was reading, marked her page with deliberate care, and looked up. Her expression was neutral, polite, but her dark eyes held depths that Morrison couldn't begin to measure. "Yes, Captain? Is there a problem?" Morrison's smile was the practiced expression of a man who had learned to wrap rudeness in customer service training. Not a problem, exactly. More of a situation that requires some flexibility. I see. Zara's voice remained steady. What kind of situation? Well, miss. Morrison glanced at his manifest tablet. Miss Mitchell, is it? We've had a last-minute change to our seating arrangements. It seems there was an error in the booking system, and we need to accommodate one of our premium frequent flyers in this section. An error? Zara tilted her head slightly. What kind of error? Morrison's confidence flickered for just a moment. He hadn't expected questions. In his experience, passengers in her demographic usually complied quickly when confronted with authority. The technical details aren't really important, he said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. What matters is that we need to find you a more appropriate seat. I'm sure you'll be much more comfortable in one of our economy plus rows. Similar legroom, and frankly, more suited to your fare class. Zara blinked slowly. Captain Morrison, I'm looking at my boarding pass right here. She held up the piece of cardstock. It clearly shows seat 1A, first class, Paradise Airways Flight 447. Are you suggesting this boarding pass is incorrect? Ma'am, I'm suggesting that there are factors beyond what appears on a boarding pass. Passenger comfort, aircraft balance, operational requirements. Operational requirements? Zara's eyebrows rose slightly. Are you referring to weight and balance considerations? Because I have to admit I'm curious how my 125 pounds in seat 1A versus, say, seat 12F would affect this aircraft's center of gravity calculations. Morrison stared at her. The confident captain's demeanor cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. Miss, I don't think you understand the complexity of commercial aviation. These are technical matters that require years of training to fully appreciate. Zara closed her book and set it on the side table. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had argued with PhDs, negotiated with world leaders, and built a technology empire from nothing but lines of code. Captain Morrison, I find aviation fascinating. In fact, I'm quite curious about your specific operational concerns. Could you help me understand exactly how passenger positioning affects the flight envelope of a Boeing 7878 versus a 7879? Because I notice this particular aircraft is a 7878, which has a slightly different moment arm calculation than the longer variant. The cabin fell silent except for the distant hum of auxiliary power units and the muffled sounds of ground operations. Morrison's mouth opened, then closed. His eyes darted between Zara's calm expression and the boarding pass in her hand. Behind them, Maria had stopped pretending to organize the galley and was watching the exchange with growing alarm. Near the forward entrance, she could see other passengers beginning to board, wealthy-looking travelers who would soon witness whatever was about to unfold. Morrison recovered his composure with visible effort. Miss Mitchell, I appreciate your interest in aviation, but I'm afraid I don't have time to provide a technical education right now. What I need is your cooperation in moving to a seat that better suits the overall passenger experience we're trying to provide. The overall passenger experience, Zara repeated slowly. And which passengers exactly would benefit from my relocation? All of them, Morrison said, his voice gaining strength from familiar ground. Paradise Airways has built its reputation on providing a premium experience for our clientele. Our first-class passengers expect a certain environment, a certain level of service that matches their expectations and their investment in our airline. I see. Zara's tone remained perfectly neutral. And what environment am I creating that might be problematic? Morrison's jaw tightened. The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Any honest answer would expose the prejudice that motivated his request. Any dishonest answer would force him deeper into a lie that was already crumbling under Zara's calm interrogation. Ma'am, he said finally, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. But the reality is that our first-class passengers pay premium prices for a premium experience. They expect to travel with other passengers who understand and appreciate that level of service. Sometimes accommodating that expectation requires making difficult decisions. "Difficult decisions?" Zara murmured. She looked around the nearly empty first-class cabin, noting the abundance of unoccupied seats. "Captain, I count at least 4 empty first-class seats. If accommodating another passenger is the issue, surely there's no shortage of options." Morrison's patience, already stretched thin, finally snapped. "Miss Mitchell, I'm going to be direct with you. This is my aircraft, and I'm responsible for the safety and comfort of all passengers aboard. I'm telling you that your presence in Seat 1A is disruptive to the passenger experience we've committed to provide. I need you to move to economy, or I'll be forced to contact airport security to resolve this situation." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Zara felt the familiar fire that had driven her through every challenge in her career, the cold determination that had carried her through skeptical investors, dismissive competitors, and countless others who had underestimated the quiet woman in the corner. But this time the fire was accompanied by something else. The absolute certainty that she held all the cards in a game Morrison didn't even know they were playing. "Captain Morrison," she said quietly, "I think there might be some confusion here, but I'm happy to help clear it up. Would you mind if I made a quick phone call to clarify my status with Paradise Airways?" Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, this isn't a matter of status. This is a matter of—" "Of course," Zara interrupted gently. "Just one quick call, to make sure we're all on the same page." She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her phone. Morrison watched suspiciously as she scrolled through her contacts and selected a number labeled simply Isabella, legal. "Isabella?" Zara's voice carried just loud enough for Morrison to hear. "It's Zara. Yes, I'm on the aircraft now. We seem to have a small situation that requires some clarification. No, nothing serious. Just a question about passenger accommodations and company policy." Morrison felt a cold finger of unease trace down his spine. Something in Zara's tone, the calm confidence, the familiarity with legal terminology, suggested that this passenger might be more than she appeared. But he had committed to his course of action, and 25 years of authority weren't easy to abandon. "Ma'am," he said, stepping closer, "I'm going to need you to end that call and comply with my instructions. If you continue to be disruptive, I'll have no choice but to involve security." Zara looked up at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through his bluster to the insecurity beneath. "Of course, Captain." "Isabella, the captain would like me to end this call. Could you come aboard to discuss this in person?" "Yes, I think that would be best." "Gate 7, Paradise Airways, 447. "Thank you." She hung up and smiled at Morrison with the expression of someone who had just played a winning chess move. "She'll be right here, Captain. I think you'll find this conversation very educational." Morrison stared at Zara's phone as if it might explode. The casual way she had summoned legal representation suggested resources that didn't match her appearance. But then again, appearances had been deceiving him all morning. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice taking on the measured tone of a man trying to regain control of a situation that was slipping away. "I don't know what kind of legal drama you're trying to create here, but this is a commercial aircraft with a departure schedule to maintain. I can't have lawyers boarding my plane to debate passenger seating arrangements." "Oh, I don't think it will take very long," Zara replied, settling back into her seat with the relaxed posture of someone who had just solved a complex problem. "Isabella is very efficient. She should be here shortly." Before Morrison could respond, the sound of footsteps and rolling luggage announced the arrival of more passengers. A tall man in an expensive suit appeared at the aircraft door, scanning the cabin with the calculating gaze of someone who measured everything in terms of personal advantage. Bradley Whitman, 45 years old, founder of Whitman Capital and holder of Paradise Airways' highest frequent flyer status. Morrison's face brightened immediately as he recognized the source of this entire confrontation. "Mr. Whitman!" Morrison stepped away from Zara's row with visible relief. "Welcome aboard. I've been expecting you." Bradley strode down the aisle with the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone whose opinion mattered to him. His suit was tailored, his shoes were Italian, and his smile was the predatory expression of someone who had built his fortune by recognizing weakness in others. "Jake," Bradley said, using Morrison's first name with the casual intimacy reserved for people who tipped well. "Good to see you again. I hope you've got everything sorted for today's flight. I've got some important calls to make once we reach cruising altitude." Morrison glanced nervously toward Zara, who was watching the exchange with the detached interest of a scientist observing a fascinating experiment. "Of course, Mr. Whitman, I've arranged for you to have the premium forward cabin experience you deserve. Just give me one moment to finalize the seating arrangements." Bradley's eyes followed Morrison's gaze to Zara, and his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. The wealthy hedge fund manager had spent his career reading rooms, evaluating threats, and positioning himself advantageously. What he saw in Seat 1A didn't register as a threat. It registered as an inconvenience. "Is there some kind of problem, Jake?" Bradley's voice carried the edge of a man accustomed to having problems solved before he became aware of them. Morrison's jaw tightened. "Nothing that can't be handled. Miss Mitchell here seems to be under the impression that she belongs in first class, but I'm sure we can find her more appropriate accommodations." Bradley's laugh was short and sharp. "More appropriate accommodations? Jake, you're being way too diplomatic. This is first class, not a community center. We pay premium prices for premium service, which includes premium passengers." The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Zara felt the familiar burn of prejudice wrapped in economic justification, the casual cruelty of people who had learned to exclude others while maintaining plausible deniability. But she also felt something else. The cold satisfaction of watching her opponents reveal exactly who they were. "Mr. Whitman, is it?" Zara's voice cut through the cabin with quiet precision. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Dr. Zara Mitchell." Bradley turned toward her with the dismissive glance of someone acknowledging an interruption from the help. "Doctor? Let me guess. PhD in grievance studies? Or maybe social justice from some community college?" The insult was delivered with practiced cruelty, the kind of attack designed to humiliate and silence. Morrison watched nervously as Bradley stepped closer to Zara's seat, clearly expecting her to fold under the pressure of their combined authority. Instead, Zara smiled. It was a small, knowing expression that seemed to contain multitudes of secrets. Computer science, actually. Stanford. Though I suppose my dissertation on adaptive neural networks might seem like grievance studies to someone who doesn't understand the underlying mathematics. Bradley's confidence flickered slightly. Stanford wasn't a community college and computer science wasn't a soft major, but he had built his fortune on doubling down when faced with unexpected resistance. "Look, Dr. Mitchell," he said, using her title like a weapon. "I'm sure you're very smart, but intelligence doesn't change the reality of the situation. This is first class. I'm a platinum member. Captain Morrison here is trying to provide the level of service that Paradise Airways promises its most valuable customers." "Most valuable customers," Zara repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting way to phrase it. Tell me, Mr. Whitman, how do you determine customer value? Is it based purely on ticket price, frequency of travel, or are there other factors?" Bradley's eyes narrowed. He sensed a trap in the question but couldn't identify its exact nature. "Value is based on contribution," he said carefully. "Paradise Airways is a business, not a charity. They provide premium service to customers who can afford to pay for it." "I see." Zara glanced at her boarding pass. And my ticket, which I paid for in full this morning. What kind of service does that entitle me to? Morrison stepped forward before Bradley could respond. Miss Mitchell, your ticket entitles you to transportation from Maui to Los Angeles. The specific seat assignment is subject to operational requirements and passenger comfort considerations. Operational requirements, Zara mused. Captain Morrison, I'm still curious about your earlier comment regarding weight and balance. Could you help me understand how moving a 125-pound passenger affects the flight characteristics of this particular aircraft? Morrison felt sweat beginning to form under his uniform collar. The technical question was outside his expertise, and he suspected the woman asking it knew far more about aviation than her appearance suggested. Ma'am, these are complex calculations involving passenger distribution, cargo weight, fuel loads, and center of gravity computations. The specific details aren't really relevant to the situation at hand. Oh, but I find them fascinating, Zara said, her voice gaining an edge that neither man recognized as dangerous. For instance, the Boeing 7878 has a maximum takeoff weight of 502,500 pounds. The center of gravity envelope is quite forgiving, with acceptable ranges typically spanning 15 to 40% of the mean aerodynamic chord. Moving a single passenger 3 rows backward would shift the CG by maybe 0.2% of the Mach. Hardly enough to require operational adjustments. The cabin fell silent except for the background hum of aircraft components. Morrison stared at Zara as if she had just spoken in a foreign language. Bradley's confident smirk had disappeared entirely. How do you know that? Morrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I read, Zara said simply. Quite a lot, actually. Technical manuals, engineering specifications, aircraft performance data. It's amazing what you can learn when you're genuinely curious about how things work. Before Morrison could respond, a new voice joined the conversation from the aircraft entrance. Excuse me, is this Paradise Airways Flight 447? All eyes turned toward a young man with Asian features and a friendly smile. He wore jeans and a Silicon Valley startup t-shirt, and he carried a laptop bag that suggested he was part of the tech industry migration that had made this route so profitable for Paradise Airways. Yes, Maria called from the galley, grateful for any interruption to the growing tension. Are you David Park? That's me, the man confirmed, holding up his boarding pass. Sorry I'm running a bit late. Traffic from the resort was insane. David Park stepped into the cabin and immediately sensed the electric atmosphere. 3 people were clustered around row 1 in what was clearly some kind of confrontation, and their body language suggested it wasn't a friendly conversation about flight amenities. Is everything okay? David asked, his programmer's instinct for pattern recognition noting the defensive posture of the woman in 1A and the aggressive stance of the 2 men looming over her. Everything's fine, Morrison said quickly. Just sorting out some seating arrangements. If you could take your seat, we'll be departing shortly. David glanced at his boarding pass, seat 3A, first class, then looked back at the scene unfolding in front of him. Something felt wrong about the dynamic he was witnessing. Actually, he said, pulling out his phone with casual efficiency. Mind if I document this for my travel blog? I like to capture the passenger experience on different airlines. You know how social media works. Authentic moments get the best engagement. The effect of his words was immediate and electric. Morrison's face went pale, while Bradley took an involuntary step backward. Sir, Morrison said urgently, I'm going to have to ask you not to record on this aircraft. Company policy strictly prohibits unauthorized filming. David looked at his phone, then back at Morrison with the expression of someone who spent his days debugging corporate policies that made no sense. Unauthorized filming? I'm just capturing my travel experience, no different from taking selfies or vacation photos. Are you saying Paradise Airways prohibits passengers from documenting their flights? That's not exactly, Morrison began. Because that would be really interesting, David continued, his voice taking on the enthusiasm of someone who had just discovered a fascinating puzzle. Most airlines encourage social media sharing. It's free marketing. Unless there's something specific you're worried about being documented. Zara watched this exchange with growing admiration. David Park might not know exactly what was happening, but his tech industry instincts had led him to the most effective possible response: transparency. "Mr. Park," she said, her voice carrying just loud enough to include him in the conversation, "I don't think Captain Morrison and Mr. Whitman want their customer service techniques documented. They seem to prefer handling passenger accommodations privately." David's eyes sharpened as he began to understand the situation. He looked at Zara, a black woman being pressured by two white men in authority positions, and felt his social justice radar activate like a compiler detecting errors in code. Passenger accommodations? He looked around the nearly empty first-class cabin. Is there some kind of overbooking situation? Not exactly, Zara said, her tone remaining perfectly calm. Captain Morrison believes my presence in Seat 1A might be disruptive to the passenger experience that Paradise Airways promises its premium customers. Disruptive how? David asked, his programmer's logic demanding specific details. Morrison felt the situation spiraling beyond his control. What had started as a simple passenger relocation was becoming a public debate about airline policies and customer treatment. "Sir, this is a private matter between Paradise Airways and Miss Mitchell. I'm going to have to ask you to take your seat so we can resolve this situation and maintain our departure schedule." "Oh, I'm not in any hurry," David said pleasantly, settling into Seat 3A with the relaxed posture of someone who had just found an interesting problem to solve. "I work in tech, so I understand the importance of user experience design. I'm genuinely curious about Paradise Airways' approach to passenger accommodation algorithms." Bradley, who had been silent during David's arrival, finally found his voice again. "This is ridiculous. Jake, just call security and have them both removed. I've got important business to conduct during this flight, and I'm not going to be delayed by whatever social justice theater these two are trying to perform." The word social justice theater hit the cabin like a slap. David's fingers moved instinctively toward his phone's camera app, while Zara's expression shifted almost imperceptibly from amused observation to something much more dangerous. "Mr. Whitman," Zara said, her voice soft but carrying an edge that neither man recognized, "I'm curious about your definition of social justice theater. Are you suggesting that passengers who don't match your demographic expectations are performing when they request equal treatment?" "I'm suggesting," Bradley replied, his voice rising, "that some people go looking for discrimination so they can create viral moments and cash in on victim culture. This whole scene has lawsuit lottery written all over it." David's phone was now openly recording, his tech worker's instinct for documentation overriding any concerns about company policies. "Lawsuit lottery," David repeated, making sure his audio was clear. "So you're saying that minority passengers who complain about unequal treatment are just trying to get rich from discrimination settlements?" Bradley realized too late that he had walked into a rhetorical trap. Every word coming out of his mouth was being preserved in digital format by someone who clearly understood the viral potential of authentic moments. "That's not what I said," he backtracked quickly. "Actually," David replied with the precision of someone who spent his days parsing code for exact meanings, "that's exactly what you said, and I've got it recorded, so we can replay it if needed." Morrison stepped forward desperately, his authority crumbling as the situation moved beyond his ability to control it. "Gentlemen, please. Miss Mitchell, I'm offering you a reasonable solution to this problem. Economy Plus offers excellent service and comfort. There's no need to turn this into a larger issue." "A larger issue?" Zara's voice remained calm, but her eyes held depths that Morrison was only beginning to recognize as dangerous. "Captain Morrison, I'm simply trying to understand Paradise Airways' policies regarding passenger accommodation. When you say economy plus offers excellent service, are you suggesting that the service in first class is somehow unsuitable for passengers like me? The question was a masterwork of verbal precision, designed to force Morrison into either admitting his discriminatory motivation or lying about company policies. Either answer would be devastating when combined with David's recording. Morrison felt trapped between his original prejudice and the growing realization that this passenger might possess resources and connections that could destroy his career. "Miss Mitchell," he said carefully, "Paradise Airways provides excellent service to all passengers regardless of any personal characteristics. Our seating policies are based purely on operational requirements and passenger comfort optimization." "Operational requirements," Zara repeated for the third time. "You keep mentioning those. Could you be more specific?" "Because I've been trying to understand how my presence in this particular seat creates operational challenges that wouldn't exist if I were seated elsewhere." Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a new voice cut through the tension from the aircraft entrance. "Captain Morrison, I'm Isabella Rodriguez from Martinez and Associates. I believe Dr. Mitchell requested some clarification regarding Paradise Airways policies." Every head in the cabin turned toward the entrance, where a woman in an expensive business suit stood holding a leather portfolio that seemed to radiate legal authority. Isabella Rodriguez was 31 years old, a senior partner at one of Los Angeles's most prestigious law firms, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument that mattered. Morrison felt the last of his control slip away as he realized that this simple passenger accommodation had just escalated into a formal legal matter. "Ma'am," he said weakly, "this is really just a minor seating issue, nothing that requires legal intervention." Isabella's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, Captain Morrison, I think you'll find that passenger rights issues are exactly the kind of thing that requires legal intervention, especially when they involve potential violations of federal anti-discrimination statutes." She stepped into the cabin with the measured pace of a lawyer who knew she held all the winning cards in a game her opponents didn't even realize they were playing. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said warmly, "I trust you've been enjoying Paradise Airways' customer service experience." Zara's answering smile was small but contained multitudes of meaning. "It's been quite educational, Isabella. Very revealing, actually." Morrison and Bradley exchanged glances, both beginning to understand that they had seriously underestimated the woman in seat 1A. But it was too late for strategic retreats. They had committed to a course of action that was about to teach them why judging people by their appearance was the most expensive mistake in business. Isabella opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Captain Morrison, before we discuss passenger accommodations, I think there are some ownership changes you should be aware of." Isabella Rodriguez opened her leather portfolio with the deliberate precision of a surgeon selecting instruments. The documents inside were crisp, official, and carried the weight of legal authority that could reshape careers and corporate structures with equal efficiency. "Captain Morrison," she began, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had delivered life-changing news to powerful people before, "I need to inform you of some recent changes to Paradise Airways' ownership structure that may affect how you approach passenger service protocols." Morrison felt his stomach drop like an aircraft hitting unexpected turbulence. The word ownership carried implications that transformed this passenger accommodation dispute into something far more dangerous to his career. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I'm not sure what kind of legal issues you think are involved here, but this is simply a matter of optimizing passenger comfort and operational efficiency. Miss Mitchell has been offered excellent alternative seating arrangements." "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella corrected smoothly. "And yes, I understand she's been offered alternative arrangements." The question is whether those arrangements comply with federal anti-discrimination laws and the new ownership's expectations for customer service standards. Bradley Whitman, who had been watching this exchange with growing unease, finally spoke up. New ownership? What are you talking about? I've been flying Paradise Airways for 5 years. The ownership hasn't changed. Isabella's smile was the expression of someone who was about to reveal information that would redefine everyone's understanding of the situation. Actually, Mr. Whitman, the ownership changed quite dramatically 48 hours ago. Paradise Airways was acquired by Quantum Tech Industries in a $1.2 billion transaction that closed Tuesday morning. The name Quantum Tech hit the cabin like a sonic boom. David Park's head snapped up from his phone, his tech industry radar immediately recognizing one of Silicon Valley's most powerful companies. Bradley's face went pale as he connected the dots between Quantum Tech's massive financial resources and the implications for his own behavior. Morrison, however, looked confused. Quantum Tech? I've never heard of them. David couldn't help himself. Captain, Quantum Tech is only one of the largest AI companies in the world. They develop autonomous systems for everything from cars to military drones. Their founder is Dr. Zara Mitchell, who's worth like $8 billion and is considered one of the most influential technologists of our generation. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Morrison's eyes slowly turned toward seat 1A, where Zara sat with the calm expression of someone watching a chess game play out exactly as she had anticipated. Dr. Zara Mitchell, Morrison whispered, his voice barely audible. The founder of Quantum Tech. That's right, Zara said softly. Though I have to say, Captain Morrison, your customer service approach has been quite illuminating. Very revealing about Paradise Airways' operational culture. The blood drained from Morrison's face as the full magnitude of his mistake crashed down on him like a building collapse. He had just spent 20 minutes trying to force the owner of his airline to move to economy class because she didn't match his expectations for first-class passengers. Bradley, meanwhile, was experiencing his own moment of horrific revelation. As a hedge fund manager, he knew exactly who Dr. Zara Mitchell was. Not just a tech billionaire, but someone with the financial resources to destroy his business relationships with a single phone call. Dr. Mitchell, Bradley stammered. I had no idea. I didn't realize. That I was the owner of the airline? Zara's voice remained perfectly calm. Or that treating passengers with basic human dignity might be important to someone with the authority to fire you? Isabella pulled a document from her portfolio and handed it to Morrison. Captain, this is the formal notification of ownership transfer. As you can see, Dr. Mitchell is now the sole owner and chairman of Paradise Airways, effective immediately. Morrison took the document with trembling hands, his eyes scanning legal language that confirmed his worst nightmare. The woman he had been trying to humiliate for the past 30 minutes wasn't just a passenger. She was literally his boss. Dr. Mitchell, Morrison began, his voice cracking. I deeply apologize for any misunderstanding. If I had known who you were. If you had known who I was, Zara interrupted gently, you would have treated me differently. That's exactly the problem, Captain Morrison. Your treatment of passengers shouldn't depend on their net worth or their appearance. It should be based on basic human respect. David Park, who had been quietly recording the entire exchange, lowered his phone and stared at Zara with something approaching awe. Holy shit, he whispered, then immediately looked embarrassed. Sorry, Dr. Mitchell, you're actually sitting right there, in economy clothes, getting discriminated against on your own airline. Language, Mr. Park, Zara said with a slight smile. But yes, that's exactly what's happening. I wanted to experience Paradise Airways service standards from the perspective of an ordinary passenger. The results have been quite educational. Maria Santos, who had been watching this entire exchange from the galley with growing amazement and terror, finally found her voice. "Dr. Mitchell," she said, stepping forward hesitantly, "I'm so sorry about what happened. Captain Morrison asked me to. He said there were irregularities with your booking and that Mr. Whitman needed the seat, and—" Her voice trailed off as she realized she was confessing to participating in discrimination against the owner of the company. Zara looked at Maria with compassionate eyes. "Maria, you're not in trouble. I heard Captain Morrison's conversation with you. I heard him threaten your job and your daughter's health care if you didn't comply with his instructions. That's exactly the kind of toxic management culture we're going to change." Isabella made a note on her legal pad. "Speaking of toxic management culture, Captain Morrison, I need to inform you that this conversation has been recorded and will become part of Paradise Airways' official record. Your statements regarding passenger accommodation based on appearance and demographic characteristics constitute potential violations of federal anti-discrimination laws." Morrison felt his 25-year career crumbling around him like a controlled demolition. "Dr. Mitchell, please, I can explain." "Actually," Zara said, standing up for the first time since the confrontation began, "I'd like you to explain. Help me understand your passenger accommodation philosophy. When you look at a black woman in casual clothes sitting in first class, what goes through your mind?" The question was asked with scientific curiosity, as if Zara were conducting a research study on the psychology of prejudice. Morrison realized that any answer he gave would either admit to racist thinking or force him to lie under legal questioning. I was thinking about passenger comfort," he said desperately. "Our premium customers expect a certain environment." "A certain environment," Zara repeated. "And what environment was I creating that concerned you?" Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Every possible answer would damn him further. Bradley, watching Morrison's destruction with growing panic about his own situation, tried to distance himself from the disaster. "Dr. Mitchell, I want to apologize for my earlier comments. I was frustrated about the delay, and I spoke without thinking. I had no idea about your background or your connection to the airline." "Mr. Whitman," Zara said, turning her attention to the hedge fund manager, "your apology suggests that you would have spoken differently if you had known my background." "But what about the passengers who don't have my background? Don't they deserve the same respect?" Bradley felt sweat beginning to form under his expensive suit. As someone who managed other people's money, he understood that association with discrimination scandals could destroy client relationships overnight. "Of course they do," he said quickly. "I believe in equal treatment for all passengers." "Equal treatment," Zara mused. "That's interesting, because a few minutes ago you were explaining to Captain Morrison why I shouldn't be in first class because I don't match the demographic profile of your typical premium passengers." David Park looked up from his phone, where he had been frantically Googling more information about Dr. Mitchell. "Dr. Mitchell, I just want to say that as someone who works in tech, what you've built with quantum tech is incredible. The autonomous systems work, the neural network architectures, you've literally changed how AI development happens across the entire industry." "Thank you, Mr. Park," Zara said warmly. "Though I have to admit, right now I'm more interested in changing how customer service happens in the airline industry." Isabella consulted her legal pad and addressed Morrison directly. "Captain, I need to ask you some specific questions for our legal record. When you decided that Dr. Mitchell needed to move from seat 1A, was that decision based on legitimate operational requirements or on assumptions about her ability to afford first-class service?" Morrison felt like a defendant in a courtroom, which he was rapidly realizing might be exactly what he was about to become. There were multiple factors involved. Mr. Whitman is a platinum member, and we try to accommodate our frequent flyers when possible. But there were multiple empty first-class seats available, Isabella noted. Why couldn't Mr. Whitman be accommodated in one of those seats instead of requiring Dr. Mitchell to relocate? Morrison's desperate search for plausible explanations was interrupted by the arrival of another passenger at the aircraft entrance. A tall, well-dressed man in his 50s appeared in the doorway, scanning the cabin with the practiced gaze of someone accustomed to command. "Excuse me," the man called out. "I'm looking for Captain Morrison. I'm Tommy Fletcher, your first officer for today's flight." Tommy Fletcher stepped into the cabin and immediately sensed the electric tension that seemed to radiate from the group clustered around row 1. His experienced pilot's instincts told him that something was seriously wrong with the pre-flight atmosphere. "Captain," Tommy said, approaching Morrison, "Ground Control is asking about our departure status. Are we experiencing some kind of maintenance issue?" Morrison looked at Tommy with the expression of a drowning man seeing a life preserver. "Tommy, we're just sorting out some passenger seating arrangements. Nothing that affects flight operations." Tommy's eyes moved across the faces in front of him: the stressed captain, the terrified hedge fund manager, the woman with the lawyer, and the tech worker with his phone out. His 20 years of aviation experience had taught him to recognize crisis situations, and this had all the hallmarks of a career-ending disaster. "Captain," Tommy said carefully, "maybe we should discuss this privately. I'm sure we can resolve any passenger accommodation issues without involving—" He gestured vaguely toward Isabella's legal portfolio. "Mr. Fletcher," Isabella said, consulting her notes, "as the first officer, you should be aware that this incident will likely result in a comprehensive review of Paradise Airways' passenger service protocols. Your cooperation with our investigation would be appreciated." Tommy felt his own career prospects suddenly hanging in the balance. As Morrison's subordinate, he could be swept up in whatever disciplinary actions resulted from this confrontation. "Investigation?" Tommy asked weakly. "Yes," Zara said, speaking for the first time since Tommy's arrival. "Mr. Fletcher, I'm Dr. Zara Mitchell, the new owner of Paradise Airways. Your captain has been explaining the airline's approach to passenger accommodation based on demographic characteristics. I'm quite interested in learning whether this represents standard operating procedure or individual initiative." Tommy stared at Zara as if she had just announced that she was an alien from another planet. The casual woman in the hoodie was the new owner of the airline? The woman Morrison had been trying to relocate for the past 30 minutes was their boss? "Owner?" Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "That's right," Zara confirmed. "And I have to say, your captain's customer service approach has been quite educational, very revealing about the airline's operational culture." Tommy looked at Morrison with growing horror as he realized that his captain had just committed career suicide in front of multiple witnesses and a legal representative. "Captain," Tommy said desperately, "perhaps we should abort this flight and return to the gate for a more thorough discussion of—" "Oh, I don't think that will be necessary," Zara said calmly. "I'm quite comfortable continuing to Los Angeles. In Seat 1A, as originally planned." Morrison felt the last of his options disappearing like fuel in a damaged tank. "Dr. Mitchell, I deeply regret this misunderstanding. If there's anything I can do to make this right—" "Actually," Zara interrupted, "there is something you can do. You can help me understand how widespread these passenger accommodation policies are at Paradise Airways. Is this approach something you developed independently, or were you following established company guidelines?" The question was designed to force Morrison into either accepting full personal responsibility or implicating other employees and managers in discriminatory practices. Either answer would provide valuable information for the comprehensive review that Zara was already planning. Isabella made another note and looked at her watch. "Dr. Mitchell, we should probably begin the formal documentation process. This incident will require comprehensive investigation and likely regulatory reporting." "Regulatory reporting?" Bradley asked, his voice cracking. "Yes, Mr. Whitman," Isabella replied with professional efficiency. Federal anti-discrimination laws require documentation of incidents involving passenger accommodation based on protected characteristics. The Department of Transportation takes these matters quite seriously. David Park looked up from his phone again, his expression shifting from amazement to something approaching admiration. "Dr. Mitchell," he said, "this is like watching a masterclass in corporate accountability. You're not just fixing one incident. You're using this to expose and correct the underlying culture that enabled it." Zara smiled at David's observation. "Mr. Park, in technology, we call that root cause analysis. When you find a bug in the code, you don't just patch the visible symptoms. You trace it back to the fundamental flaws in the code and fix those. And Paradise Airways code has some serious bugs," David observed. "Indeed it does," Zara agreed. "But that's why we're here. To debug the code and build something better." Morrison and Bradley exchanged glances, both beginning to understand that they weren't just facing immediate professional consequences. They were about to become case studies in a comprehensive transformation of airline culture. Isabella closed her portfolio with decisive finality. "Gentlemen, I think we have enough information to begin the formal process. Dr. Mitchell, should we proceed with the standard protocols for discrimination incidents?" Zara looked around the cabin at the faces staring at her, some guilty, some amazed, some fearful. She had built quantum tech by understanding human psychology as much as computer algorithms, and she could read the emotional code of everyone in the room. "Isabella," she said quietly, "let's make sure we document everything thoroughly. This conversation is going to serve as the foundation for some significant changes at Paradise Airways." The weight of her words settled over the cabin like the pressure change before takeoff. Morrison and Bradley both realized that their lives were about to change dramatically, and not in ways they had ever imagined when they woke up that morning. Tommy Fletcher stood frozen in place, understanding that he was witnessing the moment when casual prejudice collided with ultimate accountability. And Dr. Zara Mitchell sat back in seat 1A with the calm satisfaction of someone who had just demonstrated why underestimating quiet people in hoodies was the most expensive mistake anyone could make. Isabella Rodriguez reached into her portfolio and withdrew a thick document that seemed to carry the weight of legal authority in its every page. The letterhead read, "Martinez and Associates" in elegant script, but beneath that formal presentation lay the power to reshape careers and lives with surgical precision. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who had delivered career-ending news to powerful people before we proceed with the discrimination incident documentation, I think Captain Morrison and Mr. Whitman should understand the full scope of the changes occurring at Paradise Airways." Morrison felt sweat forming under his uniform collar despite the aircraft's climate-controlled environment. The word "changes" suggested that his confrontation with Dr. Mitchell was about to become something far more significant than a passenger service dispute. "Ma'am," Morrison said carefully, "I want to reiterate my sincere apologies for any misunderstanding. If I had realized Dr. Mitchell's position with the company—" "Captain Morrison," Zara interrupted gently, "your apology confirms exactly what I suspected. Your treatment of passengers is based on perceived status rather than basic human dignity. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a fundamental failure of character." The words hit Morrison like physical blows. In 25 years of commercial aviation, he had never been spoken to with such calm, devastating precision. David Park, who had been quietly live-tweeting the encounter to his 30,000 followers, looked up from his phone with growing amazement. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "I have to ask, did you plan this? Did you deliberately book this flight to expose these issues?" Zara's smile contained multitudes of strategy and satisfaction. "Mr. Park, let's just say that I believe in thorough due diligence when acquiring new companies. The best way to understand organizational culture is to experience it directly. Bradley Whitman, who had been silent while calculating the potential damage to his reputation and business relationships, finally found his voice. "Dr. Mitchell, I want to be absolutely clear that my comments earlier don't reflect my personal beliefs. I was frustrated about travel delays, and I spoke without thinking. I have the utmost respect for all passengers regardless of their background." Zara turned to face Bradley with the expression of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. "Mr. Whitman, that's a fascinating statement. But I'm curious about your definition of respect. A few minutes ago, you were explaining to Captain Morrison why my presence in first class was problematic for your travel experience. Help me understand how that demonstrates respect for passengers regardless of their background." Bradley felt like a defendant being cross-examined by a prosecutor who had already reviewed all the evidence. Every word he had spoken was being used to construct a case against him that he couldn't escape. I was concerned about flight delays," Bradley stammered. "I have important business calls to make, and I was worried about the departure time." "Important business calls," Isabella repeated, making a note on her legal pad. "Mr. Whitman, for our documentation purposes, could you clarify how Dr. Mitchell's presence in Seat 1A would have affected your ability to make phone calls from Seat 2A or 3A? The question was a legal trap designed to force Bradley into either admitting that his concerns had nothing to do with business efficiency or lying under what was becoming an official investigation. Tommy Fletcher, who had been standing frozen since learning about Zara's identity, finally managed to speak. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that I had no involvement in Captain Morrison's decisions regarding passenger seating. I only just arrived and—" "Mr. Fletcher," Zara said, turning her attention to the first officer, "I appreciate your position, but I'm interested in your perspective on Paradise Airways' passenger service culture. In your experience flying with Captain Morrison, have you observed similar approaches to passenger accommodation?" Tommy felt the weight of his career hanging in the balance. Lying would protect Morrison, but could implicate him in covering up discriminatory practices. Telling the truth might save his own job, but would destroy his captain's career. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said carefully, "I've always focused on flight operations rather than cabin service. My role is primarily technical, navigation, aircraft systems, safety protocols." "Of course," Zara replied. "But pilots observe everything that happens on their aircraft. They hear conversations, see interactions, understand the culture that develops in their crews. I'm simply asking for your professional observations." Isabella consulted her notes and addressed Tommy directly. "Mr. Fletcher, for our legal documentation, I need to ask whether you've ever witnessed or heard about passenger accommodation decisions based on demographic characteristics rather than legitimate operational requirements." Tommy realized that he was being asked to choose between loyalty to his captain and honesty about patterns he had observed over months of flying together. The answer would define not just his immediate future, but his integrity as an aviation professional. Before Tommy could respond, the aircraft entrance chimed with the arrival of another passenger. A middle-aged Latina woman in business attire appeared in the doorway, scanning the cabin with the trained gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating complex situations quickly. "Excuse me?" the woman called out. "I'm looking for Dr. Mitchell. I'm Claire Thompson from Paradise Airways Corporate Operations." The arrival of a corporate representative transformed the atmosphere in the cabin from tense confrontation to formal crisis management. Morrison's face went pale as he realized that the incident was now officially involving upper management. Claire Thompson stepped into the cabin with the measured pace of an executive who had been summoned to manage a situation that could determine the future of her own career. At 52, she had spent 15 years climbing the corporate ladder at Paradise Airways, and she immediately understood that she was walking into either a career-making opportunity or a complete disaster. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, extending her hand with professional warmth. "I'm Claire Thompson, Vice President of Operations for Paradise Airways. I received a call from our legal department about a passenger service incident requiring immediate attention." Zara stood to accept Claire's handshake, and for the first time since the confrontation began, her demeanor shifted slightly toward something resembling corporate formality. "Ms. Thompson," Zara said, "thank you for coming aboard. I think you'll find this conversation quite illuminating regarding your airline's operational culture." Claire's eyes quickly assessed the scene in front of her: the stressed captain, the nervous first officer, the terrified hedge fund manager, the passenger with the phone, and the lawyer with the legal portfolio. Her experienced executive instincts told her that this was already a full-scale crisis. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said carefully, "I understand there may have been some confusion regarding seating arrangements. I want to assure you that Paradise Airways is committed to providing exceptional service to all passengers, and any issues will be addressed immediately." "Confusion," Zara repeated thoughtfully. "That's an interesting way to describe it. Ms. Thompson, I'm curious about Paradise Airways' official policies regarding passenger accommodation based on demographic characteristics." Claire felt her stomach drop as she realized that this wasn't a simple customer service complaint. This was a formal investigation into discriminatory practices. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, her voice taking on the careful precision of someone who understood that every word was being legally documented, "Paradise Airways strictly prohibits discrimination of any kind. Our passenger accommodation policies are based solely on operational requirements and customer service optimization." "Customer service optimization," Isabella repeated, making another note. "Ms. Thompson, could you clarify how moving Dr. Mitchell from seat 1A to economy would have optimized customer service?" Claire looked at Morrison with an expression that conveyed both professional disappointment and personal fury. She had spent years building Paradise Airways' reputation, and she could see it crumbling in real time. "Captain Morrison," Claire said, her voice carrying the edge of executive authority, "I need you to explain your decision-making process regarding Dr. Mitchell's seating accommodation." Morrison felt like a defendant being interrogated by multiple prosecutors simultaneously. "Ms. Thompson, there were multiple factors involved. Mr. Whitman is a platinum member, and we try to provide premium service to our frequent flyers. There were also operational considerations regarding weight distribution and passenger comfort." "Operational considerations," Claire repeated, her voice growing sharper. "Captain Morrison, are you suggesting that moving a single passenger 3 rows backward was necessary for aircraft safety or operational efficiency?" Morrison realized that his fabricated technical justifications were crumbling under scrutiny from people who actually understood aviation operations. "Not exactly safety," Morrison admitted. "More about passenger experience optimization and operational flexibility." David Park looked up from his phone, where he had been documenting the entire exchange for his growing online audience. "Excuse me," David said, "but as someone who flies frequently for business, I'm really curious about these passenger experience optimization algorithms. How exactly do airlines determine which passengers get prioritized when conflicts arise?" The question was designed with the precision of someone who spent his professional life debugging corporate logic systems. David's tech industry background had trained him to identify the gaps between stated policies and actual implementation. Claire realized that she was facing not just a discrimination complaint, but a public relations disaster that was being documented in real time by a passenger with significant social media reach. "Mr. Park," Claire said carefully, "passenger accommodations are handled on a case-by-case basis, considering operational requirements, safety factors, and customer service goals." "Case-by-case basis?" Zara said, her voice carrying a hint of steel. "Ms. Thompson, in this specific case, what factors led Captain Morrison to conclude that I needed to move from first class to economy?" Claire looked at Morrison with an expression that suggested his career was hanging by a thread that was about to be cut. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, "I'm still gathering information about the specific circumstances. However, I want to assure you that any deviation from our official policies will be addressed through appropriate disciplinary channels." Isabella consulted her legal portfolio and pulled out another document. "Ms. Thompson," Isabella said, "for our legal record, I need to inform you that this incident involves potential violations of federal anti-discrimination statutes. The Department of Transportation requires comprehensive documentation and investigation of passenger accommodation decisions based on protected characteristics." The mention of federal regulatory involvement sent shockwaves through the cabin. Claire understood that this was no longer a customer service issue that could be resolved with apologies and upgrades. This was a legal matter that could result in federal investigation and massive financial penalties. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, her voice taking on the urgency of someone trying to prevent a complete disaster. "I want to personally apologize for any inappropriate treatment you may have experienced. Paradise Airways is committed to providing equal service to all passengers, and we will conduct a thorough review of this incident." "A thorough review," Zara mused. "Ms. Thompson, I appreciate your concern, but I'm more interested in addressing the underlying culture that enabled this incident than in conducting reviews." Claire felt a chill as she realized that Dr. Mitchell's response suggested someone with the authority and resources to implement changes far beyond simple disciplinary actions. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire asked carefully, "may I ask about your specific relationship with Paradise Airways? I want to ensure that we address your concerns at the appropriate organizational level." Isabella smiled with the expression of someone who was about to deliver information that would redefine everyone's understanding of the situation. "Ms. Thompson," Isabella said, "Dr. Mitchell is the founder and CEO of Quantum Tech Industries, which completed its acquisition of Paradise Airways 48 hours ago for $1.2 billion. She is now the sole owner and chairman of your airline." The words hit the cabin like an explosion. Claire's professional composure cracked completely as she realized that she had just been discussing customer service policies with the woman who now owned the entire company. "Owner," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible. "Dr. Mitchell, you're the new owner of Paradise Airways?" "That's correct," Zara confirmed. "And I have to say, Ms. Thompson, this passenger experience has been quite educational, very revealing about the operational culture I've just acquired." Morrison, who had been watching this exchange with growing horror, finally understood the full magnitude of his situation. He hadn't just discriminated against a passenger, he had humiliated his boss in front of multiple witnesses and legal documentation. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said, his voice cracking, "I had no idea. If I had known your position with the company, I would never—" "Captain Morrison," Zara interrupted, "your statement confirms exactly what I suspected. Your treatment of passengers depends on their perceived status rather than basic human dignity. That's not ignorance, that's a character flaw that affects every passenger who doesn't meet your demographic expectations." Tommy Fletcher, who had been silent during Claire's arrival, finally found his voice. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said desperately, "I want to be clear that I had no involvement in these seating decisions. I was only following Captain Morrison's instructions regarding flight preparation." "Mr. Fletcher," Zara said, turning to face the first officer, "I understand your position, but I'm curious about your observations of Captain Morrison's passenger service approach. Have you noticed patterns in how he handles accommodation requests from different types of passengers?" Tommy felt the weight of his career hanging in the balance. His answer would either protect Morrison through loyalty or save himself through honesty about what he had observed. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said quietly, "I've noticed that Captain Morrison tends to be more accommodating to passengers who fit certain profiles. Frequent flyers, business executives, passengers who match his expectations for first-class demographics." Morrison stared at Tommy with the expression of someone who had just been betrayed by his closest ally. "Tommy," Morrison said desperately. That's not fair. You're taking isolated incidents out of context. Isolated incidents, Isabella repeated, making another note. Captain Morrison, for our legal documentation, could you clarify how many similar passenger accommodation decisions you've made based on demographic profiling? Morrison realized that every answer he gave was being used to build a case against him that he couldn't escape. His 25-year career was crumbling in real time, documented by lawyers, witnesses, and social media. Claire, meanwhile, was calculating the potential damage to Paradise Airways' reputation and federal compliance status. As an executive, she understood that this incident could result in Department of Transportation investigation, massive financial penalties, and industry-wide scrutiny. Dr. Mitchell, Claire said urgently, I want to assure you that Paradise Airways takes discrimination complaints very seriously. We will conduct immediate training updates, policy reviews, and disciplinary actions to address any cultural issues. Cultural issues, Zara said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just demonstrated complete control over the situation. Ms. Thompson, I think you'll find that the cultural issues at Paradise Airways are more extensive than simple training can address. We're going to need comprehensive changes at every organizational level. David Park looked around the cabin with amazement. Dr. Mitchell, David said, this is incredible. You've just demonstrated how casual prejudice becomes institutional discrimination, and you've documented the entire process with multiple witnesses and legal representation. Zara smiled at David's observation. Mr. Park, in technology, we call that a proof of concept. Sometimes the most effective way to identify problems is to stress test them under controlled conditions. Isabella closed her portfolio with finality that suggested the documentation phase was complete. Dr. Mitchell, Isabella said, I think we have sufficient evidence to proceed with the formal protocols for discrimination incident investigation. Should we begin the standard regulatory reporting process? Zara looked around the cabin at the faces staring at her, some guilty, some amazed, some terrified. She had built quantum tech by understanding both human psychology and accountability systems, and she could see the complete transformation of power dynamics that her revelation had created. Isabella, Zara said quietly, let's make sure everything is documented thoroughly. This conversation is going to serve as the foundation for some significant changes in how Paradise Airways operates. The weight of her words settled over the cabin like the pressure change before takeoff. Morrison, Bradley, Tommy, and Claire all realized that their lives were about to change in ways they had never imagined. And Dr. Zara Mitchell sat in seat 1A with the calm satisfaction of someone who had just transformed a moment of personal discrimination into a catalyst for widespread institutional accountability. The silence in the cabin stretched like the moment before an avalanche. Morrison stood frozen, his 25-year career collapsing in real time as the magnitude of his mistake became undeniable. He had just spent 30 minutes trying to humiliate the woman who now owned every bolt, wire, and seat cushion on the aircraft. Dr. Mitchell, Morrison said, his voice cracking like a teenager asking for forgiveness. I don't know what to say. I deeply regret my actions, and I want you to know that this doesn't represent my true character or my commitment to customer service. Zara looked at Morrison with the clinical interest of a researcher studying a fascinating specimen. Captain Morrison, she said quietly, your statement is quite revealing. You're suggesting that your treatment of me was somehow different from your true character. But character isn't what we do when we know important people are watching. Character is what we do when we think no one important will ever find out. The words hit Morrison like physical blows. He felt sweat forming under his uniform despite the aircraft's climate control, and his hands trembled as he realized that every word was being documented for what would certainly become a federal investigation. Claire Thompson, who had been silent while processing the implications of Dr. Mitchell's ownership revelation, finally found her voice. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, her tone carrying the desperate precision of someone trying to save her own career, "I want to assure you that Captain Morrison's behavior does not represent Paradise Airways' official policies or values. We have comprehensive anti-discrimination training and clear protocols for passenger accommodation." "Comprehensive training," Zara repeated thoughtfully. "Ms. Thompson, I'm curious about the effectiveness of that training. Captain Morrison just spent 30 minutes demonstrating exactly the kind of behavior your protocols are designed to prevent. Help me understand how someone with 25 years of experience and comprehensive training could make such fundamental mistakes." Claire felt like a defendant being cross-examined by a prosecutor who already knew all the answers. Every response she could give would either admit institutional failures or blame individual employees for problems that reflected broader cultural issues. Bradley Whitman, who had been calculating the potential damage to his business relationships, finally spoke up with the desperate enthusiasm of someone trying to distance himself from a sinking ship. "Dr. Mitchell," Bradley said, "I want to be absolutely clear that I fully support your position on this matter. Discrimination has no place in modern business, and I applaud your commitment to equal treatment for all passengers." Zara turned to Bradley with the expression of someone examining a particularly interesting case study in human psychology. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "that's a fascinating transformation in your perspective. 20 minutes ago, you were explaining to Captain Morrison why my presence in first class was problematic for premium passengers like yourself. Help me understand what changed your mind about equality in airline seating." Bradley felt his carefully constructed reputation as a progressive business leader crumbling under Zara's quiet interrogation. As someone who managed other people's money, he understood that association with discrimination scandals could destroy client relationships overnight. "Dr. Mitchell," Bradley stammered, "I was frustrated about travel delays, and I spoke without thinking clearly. My comments don't reflect my actual beliefs about passenger rights or equality." "Your actual beliefs," Isabella repeated, making another note on her legal pad. "Mr. Whitman, for our documentation purposes, could you clarify whether your earlier statements about passenger demographics and premium service represent your authentic views or momentary frustration?" The question was a legal trap designed to force Bradley into either admitting racist thinking or confessing to making statements he didn't believe. Either answer would be devastating in the context of the federal investigation that was rapidly forming around this incident. David Park, who had been live tweeting the encounter to his growing online audience, looked up from his phone with amazement. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "I have to ask, how long have you been planning this? The way you've handled this confrontation suggests someone with extensive experience in exposing and documenting discrimination." Zara's smile contained layers of strategy that impressed even the tech entrepreneur watching her work. "Mr. Park," Zara replied, "I've been dealing with assumptions about my capabilities and qualifications for my entire career. Building quantum tech required learning how to document bias, expose institutional problems, and create accountability structures that actually work." Tommy Fletcher, who had been silent since his confession about Morrison's patterns of discriminatory behavior, finally found the courage to speak directly to his captain. "Captain Morrison," Tommy said, his voice heavy with regret, "I should have spoken up earlier about what I've observed. I was worried about my job security. But I realize now that staying silent made me complicit in treating passengers unfairly." Morrison stared at Tommy with the expression of someone watching his last ally abandon ship. In the brutal mathematics of airline employment, Tommy's honesty might save his own career while ensuring Morrison's destruction. "Tommy," Morrison said desperately, "you're taking isolated incidents out of context. Every captain makes judgment calls about passenger accommodation. It's part of the job." "Isolated incidents," Zara said, her voice taking on an edge that neither pilot had heard before. "Captain Morrison, I'm particularly interested in your judgment call methodology. Walk me through your decision-making process when you saw me in seat 1A. Morrison felt like a defendant being forced to confess in open court. Any honest answer would reveal the prejudiced thinking that had motivated his actions. I saw that you were dressed casually, and I made assumptions about your fare class and travel experience. I thought there might have been a booking error. Booking error, Zara repeated. And what specific indicators led you to conclude that a black woman in casual clothes must have made a mistake about her seat assignment? The question hung in the air like a challenge to admit the racism that had motivated Morrison's assumptions. He realized that any answer would either confess to racial profiling or force him to lie under legal questioning. Isabella consulted her legal portfolio and addressed the group formally. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella said, "I need to inform you that this incident now constitutes an official discrimination complaint under federal civil rights statutes. The Department of Transportation requires comprehensive documentation, investigation, and reporting of passenger accommodation decisions based on protected characteristics." Claire felt her blood pressure spike as she realized that Paradise Airways was about to face federal regulatory scrutiny that could result in massive fines, operational restrictions, and industry-wide reputation damage. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said urgently, "I want to discuss immediate remedial actions. We can implement comprehensive retraining, policy updates, and disciplinary measures to address these cultural issues." "Cultural issues," Zara said, standing up for the first time since the confrontation began. Her full presence seemed to fill the cabin, not because she was physically imposing, but because everyone finally understood the power she had always possessed. "Ms. Thompson," Zara continued, "I appreciate your concern about remedial actions, but I'm more interested in understanding how deeply these cultural problems penetrate Paradise Airways operations. This incident suggests issues that go far beyond individual training needs." Maria Santos, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement and relief, finally found the courage to speak. "Dr. Mitchell," Maria said, stepping forward from the galley, "I want to thank you for standing up to this treatment. I've worked for Paradise Airways for 6 years, and I've seen too many passengers treated unfairly because they didn't match expectations for certain types of travelers." Morrison looked at Maria with betrayal and desperation. "Maria, you're mischaracterizing normal customer service decisions. Every airline makes accommodation adjustments based on operational requirements." "Operational requirements," Maria repeated, her voice gaining strength. "Captain Morrison, you threatened my job and my daughter's health care to force me to participate in moving Dr. Mitchell because she's black and was wearing casual clothes. That's not operational, that's discrimination." The directness of Maria's statement cut through all the euphemisms and corporate speak that had surrounded the conversation. Her words laid bare the simple reality that everyone had been dancing around with legal language and technical justifications. Zara looked at Maria with respect and gratitude. "Maria," Zara said, "I heard Captain Morrison's threats against your employment. I want you to know that speaking truth in difficult situations is exactly the kind of courage that Paradise Airways needs from its employees." Isabella made extensive notes while addressing Maria directly. "Ms. Santos," Isabella said, "for our legal documentation, I need to record your statement about Captain Morrison's threats regarding your employment. Could you describe exactly what he said about your job security and benefits?" Maria took a deep breath, understanding that her honesty might protect other employees from similar threats. "Captain Morrison told me that I should remember how long I've been with Paradise Airways and whether I liked my job and benefits, including the health insurance that covers my daughter's asthma medication. He said I needed to figure out the best way to handle the seating situation to ensure everyone was comfortable." The clinical precision of Maria's testimony made Morrison's threats sound even more damaging than they had seemed in the moment. The combination of job security fears and family health care needs created a pattern of coercion that federal investigators would find particularly problematic. Morrison felt his last hopes for damage control evaporating as his own employees testified against him. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said desperately, "I never intended to threaten anyone's employment. I was simply trying to ensure optimal passenger service during a challenging situation." Zara looked at Morrison with the expression of someone who had heard enough lies to recognize them instantly. "Captain Morrison," she said, "your intentions are less important than your actions. You threatened a single mother's livelihood to force her participation in discriminating against me. That demonstrates a pattern of abuse that extends far beyond simple customer service decisions." David Park looked up from his phone, where his live tweet thread had generated thousands of retweets and hundreds of supportive comments. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "this whole incident is going viral on social media. People are amazed by how you've handled this situation with such composure and intelligence. You've turned a moment of discrimination into a master class in accountability." Zara smiled at David's observation. "Mr. Park, I learned long ago that the most effective response to prejudice isn't anger. It's documentation, exposure, and accountability. Rage fades, but institutional change requires deliberate pressure." Claire, who had been calculating potential damage to Paradise Airways' stock price and regulatory status, made a final attempt at damage control. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, "I want to discuss immediate steps to address these issues. We can implement emergency training updates, conduct comprehensive cultural audits, and establish new accountability mechanisms." "Ms. Thompson," Zara replied, "I appreciate your emergency planning, but I think you'll find that the changes needed at Paradise Airways require more than training updates and policy adjustments. We're looking at comprehensive cultural transformation at every level of the organization." Isabella closed her portfolio with the finality of someone who had completed a successful investigation. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said, "I believe we have sufficient documentation to proceed with formal discrimination complaints, regulatory notifications, and internal accountability measures. Should we begin the standard protocols for executive disciplinary actions?" The phrase "executive disciplinary actions" sent shockwaves through the cabin. Morrison realized that he wasn't just facing a customer service complaint, he was facing the end of his career in commercial aviation. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please. I have a family. I have 25 years invested in this career. If there's any way to address this situation without destroying everything I've worked for." Zara looked at Morrison with an expression that combined disappointment with something that might have been compassion. "Captain Morrison," she said quietly, "you should have considered your family and career before you decided to humiliate a passenger based on her race and appearance. The consequences you're facing are the direct result of choices you made." Tommy Fletcher, who had been watching Morrison's complete collapse with growing horror, made a final attempt to save his own career. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said, "I want to formally apologize for my role in not speaking up about problematic patterns I've observed. I'm committed to supporting whatever changes you implement at Paradise Airways." Zara nodded at Tommy's statement but didn't commit to any specific outcomes for his career. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, "acknowledgement of problems is the first step toward solutions, but real change requires sustained effort, not just crisis-motivated confessions." The weight of judgment settled over the cabin like cabin pressure during descent. Morrison, Bradley, Tommy, and Claire all understood that their lives had just changed irrevocably, and Dr. Zara Mitchell stood in the center of it all with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just demonstrated that justice, properly executed, required no theatrics, only truth, documentation, and the patience to let consequences unfold naturally. The transformation was complete. The woman they had dismissed as unworthy of first-class treatment had just taught them why underestimating people based on appearance was the most expensive lesson they would ever learn. 3 hours later, Paradise Airways Flight 447 sat motionless at the gate while the most expensive passenger service training in aviation history unfolded in real time. The aircraft had become a classroom where careers ended, justice was served, and the future of airline culture was being rewritten with the precision of computer code. Isabella Rodriguez packed her legal portfolio with the satisfied efficiency of someone who had just documented a case study that would be referenced in discrimination law courses for years to come. The evidence she had gathered, recorded conversations, witness testimonies, and admission of discriminatory practices would form the foundation of changes that extended far beyond Paradise Airways. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said, "the documentation is complete. We have sufficient evidence for federal complaints, regulatory notifications, and comprehensive internal accountability measures. The Department of Transportation will find this case particularly instructive for industry-wide policy development." Morrison stood near the aircraft door, his captain's uniform now feeling like a costume from a job he no longer held. His 25-year career had ended in 30 minutes of documented prejudice, and he understood that his name would become synonymous with the kind of bias that modern airlines could no longer tolerate. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said, his voice hollow with defeat, "I know my apologies can't undo what happened, but I want you to understand that I never intended to cause harm. I was following patterns that I thought were normal customer service practices." Zara looked at Morrison with the expression of someone who had heard similar explanations throughout her career in technology and business. "Captain Morrison," she replied, "intention matters less than impact. The patterns you thought were normal were actually institutionalized discrimination that affected countless passengers who didn't have the resources to challenge your decisions. Your case will help ensure that other passengers don't experience what I experienced today." Claire Thompson, who had spent the past hour calculating the potential damage to her own career and Paradise Airways' reputation, made a final attempt at damage control. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, "I've been in contact with our corporate headquarters. The board of directors wants to meet with you immediately to discuss comprehensive reforms. We are prepared to implement whatever changes you recommend to address these cultural issues." "Ms. Thompson," Zara replied, "I appreciate the board's sudden interest in cultural reform, but you should understand that I'm not just the aggrieved passenger in this situation. I'm the new owner of Paradise Airways. The comprehensive reforms won't be recommendations. They'll be executive decisions." Claire felt her stomach drop as the full implications of Dr. Mitchell's ownership became clear. This wasn't a customer complaint that could be managed with apologies and settlements. This was a takeover that would reshape the entire airline. Tommy Fletcher, who had been standing silently since his confession about Morrison's discriminatory patterns, finally spoke up. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said, "I want to formally request the opportunity to participate in whatever retraining and cultural change programs you implement. I know my silence enabled problematic behavior, and I'm committed to being part of the solution." Zara evaluated Tommy's statement with the analytical approach she applied to personnel decisions at Quantum Tech. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, "acknowledgement of past mistakes is important, but sustained change requires more than crisis-motivated promises. We'll see how committed you are to transformation when it requires ongoing effort rather than dramatic confessions." David Park, who had been documenting the entire encounter for his increasingly viral social media thread, looked up from his phone with amazement. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "this is incredible. You've just demonstrated how individual prejudice becomes institutional discrimination, and you've created a documented case study for addressing bias in corporate culture. This is going to change how airlines handle passenger accommodation across the entire industry." "That's the goal, Mr. Park," Zara replied. "Technology companies learned years ago that diversity and inclusion aren't just moral imperatives, they're business necessities. Airlines are about to learn the same lesson." Bradley Whitman, who had been silent while calculating the potential damage to his hedge fund's reputation, made a desperate final attempt at damage control. "Dr. Mitchell," Bradley said, "I want to formally apologize for my inappropriate comments and behavior. I've learned a great deal from this experience, and I'm committed to being a better ally in promoting equality and respect for all passengers." Zara looked at Bradley with the expression of someone who had built her fortune by distinguishing between authentic commitment and performative allyship. "Mr. Whitman," she said, "your apology is noted. However, your behavior today suggests someone who adjusts their principles based on the perceived power of the people they're addressing. That kind of selective respect is exactly what we're going to eliminate at Paradise Airways." Isabella consulted her watch and addressed the group formally. "Ladies and gentlemen," Isabella said, "I need to inform you that the formal investigation process will begin immediately. Captain Morrison, you should expect contact from federal regulatory authorities within 48 hours. Mr. Whitman, your statements have been documented and may be referenced in broader industry compliance reviews." Morrison felt the weight of his complete professional destruction settling over him like the pressure change during emergency descent. His career, his reputation, and his livelihood had been destroyed by 30 minutes of documented prejudice. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said desperately, "is there any possibility of addressing this situation without federal involvement? I'm willing to accept any internal disciplinary action, any training requirements, any accountability measures you recommend." Zara looked at Morrison with the calm finality of someone who had made decisions that would affect thousands of future passengers. "Captain Morrison," she said, "federal involvement isn't punishment for you. It's protection for every passenger who might face similar treatment in the future. Your case will become part of the legal framework that prevents other people from experiencing what I experienced today." Maria Santos, who had been listening to this exchange with growing relief and amazement, stepped forward from the galley. "Dr. Mitchell," Maria said, "I want to thank you not just for standing up to this treatment, but for showing me that speaking truth is more important than protecting my job. You've given me the courage to report other incidents I've witnessed over the years." Zara looked at Maria with respect and gratitude that extended far beyond the specific incident they had just experienced. "Maria," Zara said, "your willingness to tell the truth despite Captain Morrison's threats is exactly the kind of moral courage that Paradise Airways needs from its employees. Truth-telling will be rewarded under the new ownership, not punished." Claire, who had been processing the implications of comprehensive ownership changes, made a final attempt to understand the scope of Dr. Mitchell's plans. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, "could you help me understand the timeline for implementing changes at Paradise Airways? The board and senior management need to prepare for whatever transformations you're planning." Zara smiled with the expression of someone who had been planning comprehensive changes since the moment she decided to acquire the airline. "Ms. Thompson?" Zara replied. "The changes began the moment I walked onto this aircraft. What you've witnessed today is the first step in transforming Paradise Airways from an airline that tolerates discrimination into one that actively promotes dignity and respect." Tommy, who had been calculating his chances of surviving the ownership transition, asked the question that everyone was thinking. "Dr. Mitchell," Tommy said, "what happens to the employees who weren't involved in today's incident? Will there be job security for people who want to be part of building a better airline culture?" Zara's response revealed the strategic thinking that had built Quantum Tech into a global technology leader. "Mr. Fletcher," she said, "Paradise Airways will need employees who are committed to treating every passenger with respect, regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status. Those employees will find opportunities for growth and advancement. Those who can't adapt to that standard will find opportunities elsewhere." Isabella completed her final documentation and addressed the group. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said, "the legal foundation for comprehensive reform is now in place. Federal authorities will use this case as a model for industry-wide accountability measures. You've created a template for addressing institutional discrimination that will extend far beyond Paradise Airways. David Park looked around the cabin with the amazement of someone who had just witnessed history being made. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "this is going to be studied in business schools and law classes for decades. You've demonstrated how to transform individual moments of injustice into comprehensive institutional change." "That's how progress actually happens, Mr. Park," Zara replied. "Not through angry confrontations or viral videos, but through documentation, accountability, and the patient work of building better processes." Morrison, who had been standing silently while his career collapsed around him, made a final statement that revealed the depth of his professional destruction. "Dr. Mitchell," Morrison said, "I understand that my actions today have ended my career in commercial aviation. I want you to know that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to learn from this experience and become a better person." Zara looked at Morrison with an expression that might have contained a trace of compassion for someone whose prejudice had finally met consequences. "Captain Morrison," she said, "personal growth is possible for anyone willing to do the difficult work of examining their assumptions and changing their behavior. Your future depends on whether you're genuinely committed to that growth or just trying to minimize the damage to your reputation." Claire, who had been frantically calculating survival strategies for her own career, made a final attempt to position herself for the new ownership era. "Dr. Mitchell," Claire said, "I want to formally volunteer to lead whatever cultural transformation initiatives you implement. I have 15 years of experience with Paradise Airways operations, and I'm committed to building the kind of airline culture that reflects your values." Zara evaluated Claire's offer with the skeptical approach she applied to all crisis-motivated conversions. "Ms. Thompson," she replied, "leadership positions under the new ownership will be earned through demonstrated commitment to equality and respect, not just promises made during crisis situations. We'll see how you perform when treating people fairly requires sustained effort rather than damage control." The cabin fell silent as everyone processed the magnitude of the changes that had just been set in motion. Careers had ended, reputations had been destroyed, and the future of airline culture had been redefined by one woman's refusal to accept treatment that reduced her humanity to demographic assumptions. Isabella packed her final documents with the satisfaction of someone who had just created legal precedent that would protect countless future passengers. "Dr. Mitchell," Isabella said, "the transformation you've initiated today extends far beyond Paradise Airways. This case will become the foundation for industry-wide changes in how airlines train employees, handle passenger complaints, and maintain accountability for discriminatory practices." Zara stood in the center of the cabin, surrounded by the wreckage of careers built on prejudice and the foundation of an airline culture that would prioritize dignity over demographics. "Everyone," she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just demonstrated the power of patient justice. "Today we've learned that assumptions based on appearance are not just morally wrong, they're career-ending mistakes. Paradise Airways will become proof that treating every passenger with respect isn't just the right thing to do, it's the smartest business practice." The lesson was complete. The woman they had dismissed as unworthy of first-class treatment had just taught them that underestimating people based on prejudice was the most expensive education they would ever receive. And Dr. Zara Mitchell had transformed a moment of personal discrimination into a catalyst for changes that would protect every passenger who flew Paradise Airways for generations to come. 6 months later, the transformed Paradise Airways gleamed like a completely different airline. The same Boeing 787 that had witnessed the most expensive customer service lesson in aviation history now reflected a culture where respect came standard with every ticket, regardless of passenger demographics or perceived status. Dr. Zara Mitchell settled into seat 1A, the same seat that Captain Morrison had tried to force her to abandon, and smiled at the transformation surrounding her. The physical aircraft remained unchanged, but everything else about Paradise Airways had been rebuilt from the ground up with the precision of debugging faulty code and implementing better algorithms. "Dr. Mitchell, welcome aboard," Maria Santos said, approaching with the confident posture of someone whose moral courage had been rewarded rather than punished. Her uniform now bore the insignia Director of Passenger Experience, and her smile carried the genuine warmth of someone who no longer lived in fear of speaking truth to authority. "Thank you, Maria," Zara replied. "How are things progressing with the new service protocols?" "Beautifully," Maria answered. "The crew training has been incredible. Every employee understands that passenger dignity isn't negotiable, regardless of appearance, background, or fare class. It's amazing how much service improves when respect becomes the foundation instead of an afterthought." The transformation of Paradise Airways had been swift and comprehensive. Within days of the documented discrimination incident, Zara had implemented changes that touched every aspect of airline operations. Captain Morrison's termination had been immediate and final, his career ending in federal regulatory proceedings that established new industry standards for passenger accommodation training. Tommy Fletcher had survived the ownership transition, but barely. His confession about Morrison's discriminatory patterns had saved his job while destroying his former captain's career. Now he served as first officer under a new captain who had been hired specifically for her commitment to equal treatment principles, and every flight served as an opportunity to demonstrate his claimed transformation. The new captain was Zara Rodriguez, a former Navy pilot with an impeccable record and zero tolerance for discrimination. She had been selected from over 200 candidates specifically for her demonstrated commitment to treating every passenger with identical respect, regardless of their appearance or perceived status. "First Officer Fletcher," Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the cabin speakers. "Please join me for the pre-flight passenger acknowledgement." The passenger acknowledgement was one of Zara's innovations, a brief statement at the beginning of every flight that established Paradise Airways' commitment to equal treatment. It had become so popular with passengers that other airlines were beginning to adopt similar policies. Tommy's voice came through the speakers, carrying none of the arrogance that had characterized his former captain's communications. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Paradise Airways Flight 447. I'm First Officer Fletcher, and I want you to know that every member of our crew is committed to providing exceptional service to every passenger, regardless of background, appearance, or fare class. Dignity and respect are standard equipment on every Paradise Airways flight." The words would have seemed impossibly progressive 6 months earlier. Now they represented the new normal for an airline that had learned to make inclusion a competitive advantage rather than a legal obligation. David Park, who was once again flying the same route for business, looked up from his laptop with satisfaction. His viral documentation of the original incident had generated over 2 million views and sparked industry-wide conversations about passenger rights. More importantly, it had demonstrated the power of real-time accountability in addressing discrimination. "Dr. Mitchell," David said, "I have to tell you, flying Paradise Airways has become completely different. The service is incredible, but more importantly, every passenger is treated with genuine respect. You've created something special here." "Thank you, Mr. Park," Zara replied. "But the real credit goes to employees like Maria who had the courage to speak truth even when it was dangerous. Building better culture requires people willing to do the right thing when no one is watching." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement from the gate area. A familiar voice carried through the aircraft speakers, but this time it belonged to someone whose life had changed dramatically since the original incident. "Paradise Airways Flight 447, this is Bradley Whitman speaking. I'm calling to apologize to all passengers for my inappropriate behavior on this route 6 months ago. My treatment of Dr. Mitchell and my support for discriminatory practices were wrong, and I want everyone to know that I've learned better ways to be a respectful traveler. The announcement was part of Whitman's settlement agreement with Paradise Airways. Rather than face federal prosecution for his role in the discrimination incident, he had agreed to comprehensive sensitivity training and public acknowledgement of his mistakes. His hedge fund had also implemented new diversity and inclusion policies, partly to repair the reputation damage from his documented behavior. More importantly, Bradley had been permanently banned from Paradise Airways, along with a growing list of other airlines that had adopted similar policies for passengers who supported discriminatory treatment. His travel options had been significantly reduced, serving as a powerful reminder that passenger rights extended beyond individual flights. Zara watched the boarding process with satisfaction, as passengers of every background and appearance were greeted with identical warmth and professionalism. The transformation hadn't been easy. Several employees had resigned rather than adapt to the new culture, but those who remained had discovered that treating people with dignity actually made their jobs more rewarding. "Dr. Mitchell," a new voice said. "May I introduce myself? I'm Jennifer Kim, your new Director of Cultural Accountability." Zara looked up to see a young Asian American woman with the confident bearing of someone who specialized in turning moral principles into measurable business practices. Jennifer had been hired from a consulting firm that specialized in corporate culture transformation, and her job was to ensure that Paradise Airways' commitment to equality became permanent rather than temporary. "Jennifer," Zara said, "excellent timing. How are the quarterly culture assessments progressing?" "Incredibly well," Jennifer replied. "Employee satisfaction is up 40%. Customer complaints about discriminatory treatment have dropped to 0, and passenger loyalty scores are the highest in the industry." It turns out that treating people with respect is actually great for business. The culture assessments were another Zara innovation. Every quarter, Paradise Airways conducted comprehensive surveys measuring employee attitudes, passenger experiences, and cultural progress. The results were published publicly, creating transparency that made backsliding nearly impossible. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, Zara reflected on the comprehensive changes that had transformed Paradise Airways from an airline that tolerated discrimination into one that actively promoted dignity. The employee handbook had been completely rewritten. Training programs had been redesigned around respect principles, and hiring practices now prioritized character alongside technical qualifications. Most importantly, the new ownership had established clear consequences for discriminatory behavior. Employees who treated passengers unfairly faced immediate termination, while those who demonstrated exceptional commitment to equality received recognition and advancement opportunities. The incentive structure now rewarded moral courage rather than bias. "Dr. Mitchell," Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the speakers, "we're cleared for takeoff. Thank you for choosing Paradise Airways, where every passenger flies with dignity." As the aircraft lifted into the blue Hawaiian sky, Zara looked out the window at the Pacific Ocean below. The same route that had witnessed her humiliation 6 months earlier was now proof that individual moments of injustice could become catalysts for comprehensive institutional change. Her phone buzzed with a message from Isabella Rodriguez, her legal counsel. "Zara, the Paradise Airways case has just been cited in new federal regulations for airline passenger rights. Your experience is now part of the legal framework protecting travelers across the entire industry. Congratulations on changing aviation history." The message brought a smile to Zara's face. The discrimination she had experienced hadn't just been addressed. It had been transformed into protection for every passenger who would fly in the future. That was how real progress happened. Not through angry confrontations or viral outrage, but through patient documentation, accountability, and the sustained work of building better processes. Maria approached with a crystal glass of sparkling water and the warm smile of someone whose moral courage had been validated by results. "Dr. Mitchell," Maria said, "I wanted to thank you again for showing me that speaking truth is more important than protecting comfort. The changes you've made have affected thousands of passengers and employees. This really is a different airline now." "Maria," Zara replied, "the credit belongs to people like you who had the courage to do the right thing when it mattered. I just created an environment where that courage could be rewarded instead of punished." As Paradise Airways Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, Zara settled back into Seat 1A with the satisfaction of someone who had transformed personal adversity into widespread progress. She had built quantum tech by understanding that technology should serve human dignity, and now she had proven that airlines could operate the same way. The woman who had been told she didn't belong in first class now owned the entire airline, and every seat reflected her commitment to treating people with the respect they deserved simply by virtue of their humanity. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions happened quietly, one conversation at a time, until suddenly the entire world operated differently. Dr. Zara Mitchell had just demonstrated that the most expensive seat on any plane wasn't in first class. It was the one you gave up when you chose prejudice over people. And now, 35,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean, every passenger on Paradise Airways could fly with the dignity that should have been standard all along. Never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book owns the entire library. Captain Morrison and Bradley Whitman learned that lesson at the cost of their careers and reputations, discovering too late that true power doesn't announce itself. It simply acts when justice demands action. What would you have done in Dr. Mitchell's position? Have you ever stood up for dignity when others chose discrimination? Share your story in the comments below, because every voice matters, and your experience could inspire someone else to choose courage over comfort. If this story of quiet strength and patient justice moved you, hit that like button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring more stories of accountability and transformation to light. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that respect is a right, not a privilege. Because change doesn't happen through anger, it happens through accountability, one flight at a time. Thanks for watching, and until next time, remember that dignity has no price tag. And the best view isn't from the window. It's from watching everyone around you soar with the respect they've always deserved.